Oh yeah, and there is a delay.
There is a delay. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm live on Zoom.
All right.
Oh, and they can hear us.
Okay. I'm going to start the music, and then we'll
Right.
kind of welcome people into the room. Can you hear the music?
Yeah.
Okay. Did Eric manage to get on Facebook?
You know what I'll do? I'll just put my cell phone here because I'm logged into it,
Okay.
and I can look at my cell phone on the screen at the same time.
Okay.
So Carrie, I've just got my cell phone here, so I can see like Benjamin is already logged in.
Guys, we're going to just listen to a little bit of music and chill out for a few minutes while everybody's piling into the room. Feel free to say hello to us so we know you're there.
We have Krista, Benjamin, and Ben, and Amy.
Excellent.
And Barbara. No, good. I can just look at the questions here. Oh, room's filling up.
See, we got about maybe a few more minutes here. I'm still waiting on that milk to scald. It takes a little while.
Yeah, it does. Yes, my milk's already scalding, so I'm gonna go ahead and just mix it with the oats.
Oh yeah, okay. Should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the next installment, today's installment of Hollywood Kitchen. Today we are going to talk about the life, the career, and the cooking of Norma Shearer. So my special guest is Darren Barnes. Oh shoot, my scalding milk is boiling over here. My special guest is Darren Barnes. Darren Barnes is a Norma Shearer expert, a film collector. He is an incredibly generous person who is really giving us a huge amount of his time today to do this episode. So thank you so much, Darren. I think the Norma fans are gonna love this and learn a lot and have a great time today. So we're really excited.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this ever since we started talking about this.
I was going to say, when I did the Anne Dvorak episode, it kind of occurred to me that there were some people watching that weren't really well versed about the star. And so I kind of wanted to start off today with a little bit of like a 101. So for people that are brand new to the world of Norma Shearer and don't know much about her or anything about her, would you mind kind of giving us a Norma in a nutshell, if you will?
Yeah. So Norma was Canadian born. And she came to the States in 1920. She started working in silent films pretty much right away. And by 1923, she was already a working actress and signed her first contract with MGM. So by 1924, when MGM actually came together, she was one of their first female stars. And she was pretty much the biggest one until Garbo came along. She married the head of production at MGM, Irving Thalberg, in 1927. And in 1930, she began what's called her pre-code round of films, which Carrie and I will talk about. And she won an Academy Award. So through the 30s, she was one of the biggest stars in the world, one of the biggest stars at MGM. She was the biggest box office star in England through the 30s. But sadly, Irving Thalberg died in 1936. She finished out her contract with MGM and finished up in 1942 and never returned to the screen. So she had a relatively short career in Hollywood terms, about 22 years, and 13 years of that in sound films. And she retired, traveled the world. So from 1942 until her death in 1983, she just skied and sort of enjoyed the jet set of the world.
Very cool. So, how did you first discover Norma Shearer? What was your gateway into Norma's world?
It's a great story, and I always love telling it. So when I was 13, I had a social studies teacher, ninth grade. I went to Santa Monica High School, who her name was Mrs. Farmer, and she loved old movies. So she would bring in one of the first films she brought in was His Girl Friday to talk about the media newspapers. And for our final project, she had us all pull a name out of a hat, and I pulled Norma Shearer out of the hat. Well, at 13, I loved old movies, but I had no idea who she was. Her films weren't available. There was nothing on her. So I went to the library. I'd look her up, and what I read wasn't very nice about her because of her marriage to Irving, and it was all about nepotism, and she wasn't a very good actress. But then I started reading all these other things about how big she was at the box office, how popular she was, and you just can't make a movie star. Like, you just have to have that it factor. So I would so I decided, I need to figure out like more about this lady. There was nothing really written on her. So on the weekends, I would take the bus from Santa Monica, transfer in Beverly Hills, and go to Hollywood and go to all the shops. And I would talk to all the dealers, and those guys had been around 50 years at that point. So they were just absolutely enamored that here was this little 13-year-old kid asking about Norma Shearer. So there was a guy in one shop named Bob Coleman, who was a big Hurrell collector, who was probably the top beauty photographer of the 30s, which we'll show some photos and talk about later. And I went in and I started talking to him about it, and he loved the fact that I was asking about Norma. So on one of my next trips, I came in and he had an entire wall of Norma Hurrell portraits that were 16 by 20 prints that were from the studio, and it was just incredible. And he would sell me photos for $1 on the promise that I would never sell them, because no matter where you are in life, and I still know exactly which ones he sold me for $1. I would go to Larry Edmunds, which is still there, which is where I bought some of my first photos. And it grew. And then I graduated high school, I moved away, and I just sort of put it on the back burner, and I was a poor student. And I met a friend named Garland who just thought it was just the coolest thing ever. She's like, why haven't you continued with this? Why haven't you picked this stuff up? So I started collecting again for a couple of years in the early 90s. And then I finished college. I started working. I kind of put it on the back burner again. And Garland got married and moved off. And I met my friend Christina Rice, who did the Anne Dvorak spot with you in, 96 or 97. And we tried to dazzle each other with our film knowledge. So, she threw Anne Dvorak at me, and then I started showing her my Norma stuff. And again, she was like, this is so cool. You need to continue with this. So I've continued for the last 20 years pretty consistently on and off. And luckily, as I've gotten older, I've been able to afford it a little better, because that was always a hindrance as well. So my collection has grown into about 6,000 photos. So I've got 2 filing cabinets, two sliding cabinets, a credenza, and my desk just covered in Norma stuff. So I've been going through it all, and I'm working on putting together a timeline, because I ultimately want to do a book. So I'm pretty excited about that. And in these times, I've got plenty of time to do it.
I think that's so great, because the only book I've ever really seen about Norma is the Gavin Lambert book, which frankly I didn't like. And I felt that she's really ripe for a complete critical reprisal here.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I was really drawn to her as well is one of the few things I would read that were relatively positive was in her early career, people kept telling her that she was bow-legged, she was cross-eyed, she was this, and that she would just never make it. And just by pure sheer will and determination, she made herself into this incredible, beauty. And she was beautiful, but she had to really work at it to get there. And she wasn't just like a Carol Lombard or a lot of those ladies that were just, Marlene Dietrich, who had just their own natural aura about them. So Norma really created her own image. So when Gavin Lambert's book came out in 1990, I read that ferociously. And there was another one by Lawrence Quirk, But the Gavin Lambert book just really painted Norma to be this really tragic figure, sort of Norma Desmond-ish, and how she just kind of lived in the past and would sort of just be, a little out there. And I just hadn't, I from everything I started to research and look at, and even just reading articles about her later in life, it just wasn't the impression that I was getting. So I really felt like she sort of handed a raw deal by that book. So, I appreciate that it was written and a lot of it is accurate, but as I'm starting to put together my timelines and all my information, he's got a lot of holes. And I think in 1990, we didn't have the internet. And I think there were just places in her life he just didn't know where she was or what she was doing that's accessible now. So he just sort of filled in the gaps. So yeah, and the Lawrence Quirk book was written by the son of the editor of Photoplay magazine. So it's very a romanticized version of Norma. So, I still recommend reading them just to get the flavor of her and her career and where she was at. But, I also have normashearer.com, which has a really good biography that was written with Mark Vieira. So, and he is just a prime source for Norma and in particular Irving Thalberg, her husband.
Actually, I wanted to show people really quickly because I love recommending books. People can read, especially since a lot of us are trapped at home. So Mark Vieira wrote a full-length biography about Irving Thalberg, which is excellent, incredibly exhaustively researched and well-written. He did a photo book on Thalberg called Hollywood Dreams Made Real, Irving Thalberg and the Rise of MGM. And for those of you who want to do a really deep dive into George Farrell, and you will love doing so, this book is really huge, but George Farrell's Hollywood, Glamour Portraits 1925 to 1992. Yeah. And as we know, George Farrell played a major part in Norma's stardom.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when Norma was establishing herself as an actress, she's adorable in her movies, but she's just a sweet ingenue type of character. And she got to play a dual role as a prostitute in one of her early films, Lady of the Night, which is available 1925. But she just didn't have that sort of sex appeal about her. And this book came up called Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott, and which was ultimately changed to The Divorcee. And Norma wanted to play it, and Irving just didn't think that she could do it. So she had made a film with Ramon Navarro, who was one of the big actors on the MGM lot in 1927. And he had brought in some photos that had been photographed by George Farrell. And so Norma said, well, who is this guy? I want to, these photos are amazing. So she packed up her hairdresser and a bunch of dresses into her 1927 canary yellow Rolls Royce and drove over to George Farrell's studio, which is at the Granada building, which is right off of Wilshire Boulevard, and it's still there, and went in and did this incredible, sexy photo shoot of her. And he knew how to elongate her and just bring out all the best in her. And just came up with this incredibly sexy session. And she took him to her husband, Irving Thalberg, and Irving's like, I think you can do this. And she got The Divorcee, got an Oscar. So she had her first child, her son. She won an Oscar, got The Divorcee. And 1930 was just a pitch year for Norma.
Yeah, George Farrell really changed the game because I think there's some photos of stars that they might be sexy at that time, but they don't ring true as sexy today. And those Norma photos, they're so sexy even by 2020 standards. I mean, they're still sizzling.
Oh yeah. Yeah, she was photographed by Clarence Bull and Ruth Harriet Louise and all the other in-house photographers. And she went to New York and was photographed for Vogue. Like, she was photographed by every major photographer for the most part. Cecil Beaton shot her, but Farrell just really brought out just knew how to bring out the sexiness in her and just really make her look like a vamp. So, and that just really took her career into just such a high gear for, the early 30s. It was incredible.
I have to admit, when I very first saw Norma Shearer, when I was in high school, I saw The Women. And I loved the movie, but I felt so frustrated that her character just welcomes back with open arms this philandering husband. I remember being so annoyed, not with her specifically, but with that concept. And it kind of just soured me a little on her. And then I saw Romeo and Juliet, which is a beautifully mounted production, but she and Leslie Howard are 20 years too old for those parts. And you're just like, so I didn't think that much of her. But then When I moved to Los Angeles like 20 years ago, I got to see her pre-codes. I saw A Free Soul, Strangers May Kiss, and The Divorcee. That completely changed my image of Norma because she's this independent, free-spirited young woman, really flipping the script on gender roles and the fact that women should have just as much power in decision making and freedom as men. And it was really kind of revelatory for me to see that.
I mean, I always recommend, see The Divorcee, give it a chance. It's an early sound film, so it's a little creaky. But when you get about 5 or 10 minutes into it, you really get into the story and just the juice of it. And it's an incredible story. It's a husband who cheats on his wife and he expects her to just take it. And in revenge, she goes and cheats on him. And because of the double standard, they get a divorce. And she ends up just traveling the world and just sleeping with whoever she wants. So it's a pretty incredible story. And, it's sort of wrapped up in tied up in a little bow at the end because you had to at the time. But the journey with her is incredible, and just watching her enjoy herself. She looks like she's having a great time.
Yeah, it's a really good film, and it's I think a really interesting. It's got so many interesting things in it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with the women, that's the film that she's probably the most remembered for. It's the most available, and it's the most accessible film. It's 1939. It's that peak year. That's by then sound had been perfected. Screen acting had been really figured out, and she's really good and really subtle in the middle of that circus that's going on, and she still affects a little bit of her older silent self. And I know George Cukor said that when he worked with Norma, she had a tendency to give a little too much, which he didn't mind, considering all the actresses that he had to work with who would never give enough. So, he'd always sort of bring her down a little bit. And, she really, as I get older and can understand her character in the women, I get it. And she's really good. And it's got that little bit of a hammy end, but I don't know how else they could have ended it. So, but it's such a crowd pleaser, and people to this day still lose their minds. I think it's been a TCM, was it once or twice? It might've been repeated, but people went nuts. And I've seen it probably in the big screen about half a dozen times. And every time it's new to me. And there's some dialogue in it that's so insane. I was actually seeing it at the Egyptian with my friend Garland about 10 or 15 years ago. And I screamed out one of her lines and the whole audience just went nuts and started applauding. Because it's a stupid line, but it was just going along with the movie. Had such a great time.
That's the ultimate crowd pleaser. Yeah, I could see that movie too. Like I have actually like 20 times, and you just don't get tired of it.
Every time it's on TCM, like you just stop and watch it. You're just waiting for Roz's next scene, and Paulette, and just all the actresses are just great. They're chewing up the scenery the entire time.
Is that your favorite Norma movie, or what is your favorite Norma movie and why?
It kind of depends on what mood I'm in. Probably my favorite film is Escape, which is a little known film, and it was made in 1940. I just think she is, it shows where she could have gone in her career if she hadn't chosen to retire. She gives a really subtle performance, and she's stunningly beautiful in it. As women get older, and I actually had a makeup artist tell me once that women really hit their peak of beauty around 35. You go from like sort of being a young girl and a little soft, and then when you really hit that, it's like 35 to 40 where you just really become a woman. And she's 38 in that movie, and she just glows throughout the whole thing. And she has a really strong director who's holding her back, and her performance is just so subtle and incredible. And she has one of the final scenes of the movie, and just really shuts it down. Like, she's incredible. So I always try to encourage, if you want to see where Norma could have gone in her career, watch that movie. It's a World War II drama, and she's not really the star of it, but it really shows like, oh my God, she could have been incredible, because her last two films, she just wanted to get done, and they're not very strong scripts, and she was sort of dealing with her image, and suddenly she was 40 and a single mom and an actress in Hollywood, and she'd reached her peak, and there's a lot of things going on, and I could imagine being in this business, where she was at that point. So those two movies are, they're little gems in their own little ways, but they're not what they could have been. So yeah, I definitely say Escape. Women is always just such a crowd pleaser. And then just going to the early ones, Private Lives is fantastic with Robert Montgomery and Una Merkel. You know, it's fantastic. It's early talkie, but it's Noel Coward, and Norma has a scene in it where she and Robert Montgomery have this incredible fight. And I've seen it on the big screen twice, and both times the audience went absolutely nuts for Norma at the end of the scene. So, you know, it's great to see audiences 80 or 90 years later that are just, you know, stomping the floor because they're so excited about her performance.
I love a free soul because she and Gable both are so good in that movie. And that movie really, you can tell Gable's like, it's really him becoming a star, and she's so sexy in that movie. And that's kind of one of my favorites. I really.
Oh yeah, the seduction scene, which is the famous scene from that movie.
Yeah.
Well, it's about 10 minutes. It's a long scene, and it just crackles because she's seducing this gangster, and it's just like, oh my God, this scene is so incredibly just hot and electric, and the chemistry and, you know, everything is just coming off the screen. You know, it's another one. It's a fantastic movie. So should we get to baking?
Yes. My milk has scalded, so okay, I should add the scalding milk. Then actually, should we talk about the recipe first, though? The oatmeal.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I didn't know if you want to put your milk and oatmeal together yet.
Let's put my milk and oatmeal here together. Okay. Yes. Oh, shoot. Okay. I'm gonna pour my scalding milk into the oatmeal, and then we're going to talk about this recipe while this sits here. Okay. All right. So this oatmeal stick recipe, by the way, whenever I do these episodes, there's always a lot of discussion about what we should make and why, etc. This particular recipe is from the Photoplay magazine cookbook of 1927. They did a couple of different editions of these. And it's hard to find the Photoplay cookbooks in hard paper copies. They're pretty rare and they're very expensive. But there's a website called vintagecookbooks.com. So I downloaded the free PDF of the cookbook, which you can too if you'd like to do that. And that's where this comes from. Darren and I made this Thursday night, and we learned a lot of lessons.
Yes.
Learned a lot of lessons. So should we talk about those?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I mean, as Carrie and I figured out, you know, these recipes and these books were put out for publicity. I don't think they're really meant to be cookbooks. And they might be something that, you know, they would have showed the recipe to Norma, and she probably said, that sounds delicious, sure. But as Carrie and I started to break it down, you know, even for the oatmeal sticks, it just says put and bake 10 minutes in a fairly hot oven. Well, what's a fairly hot oven? I mean, we assume maybe 350. And there's just shortcuts that are in these recipes. We're like, well, where do we put this with this? And how long do we hold on to that? So they're not very detailed at all. So as Carrie and I were putting it together on Thursday night, it was kind of just a big globby mess.
So I get on the ladder today and redo my roof with the dough still in my fridge, because it would replace tar as a reshingling agent. It really would.
Yeah, and we baked them, and they're supposed to be sticks, Canadian oatmeal sticks, and I think we just kind of got blobs that were just big blobs of baked flour for the most part, with a little oat in it. You can taste the oatmeal, you couldn't taste anything. It was just, they were like a scone with no flavoring whatsoever.
Yeah, it was like eating a Post-it note, and they were so gooey that just getting the stick, like she said, to roll them out like a lead pencil, that was almost impossible. I'll show you my results of that later, but yeah, it was not.
So yeah, so for the recipe itself, it's really easy. So Carrie's got all the ingredients in front of her, so it's a little easier to see her screen than mine.
I'll talk about the ingredients, and I've got it on my phone here, the recipe. Okay, so this says 3 cups of flour. Darren and I learned that if you have that much flour, it is going to be so incredibly dense. So I have 2 cups of flour in here, which I may even reduce that.
Yeah, I did 1.5 cups of flour.
Okay. I'm gonna dig out some of this flour then.
Because it says 3 cups of flour and 1 tablespoon of sugar. So I cut the flour in half and then added a full cup of sugar.
Okay, because right here I just have 1 tablespoon of sugar. So yeah. I think what I'm gonna do, got my measuring things here. All right, I'm gonna do a full cup of sugar right here. Okay, full cup of sugar. 3 teaspoons.
And Benjamin from Germany wants to know, are there any photos of Norma actually cooking? Which is a great question. So I think Carrie and I discussed this a little bit. Norma didn't cook. That was the thing. Everyone I ever spoke to that ever knew Norma, ever had any interactions with Norma, she didn't cook. She did a little bit later in life, which I'll tell that story a little bit later. But she did do a photo shoot in conjunction with this recipe book of her cooking these oatmeal squares, which I think, Carrie, do you have a photo of?
I don't have it on me right now, but after the talk is over, I'll post these on my Facebook page so people can see the photos
Okay.
of the session.
Perfect. And that kitchen that she's baking in, they show her mixing it in a bowl, putting it in the oven, taking it out of the oven. That's not even her kitchen. I think that's just a set at MGM. You know, they probably put her over. Yeah. Oh no, go ahead.
One of the reasons they did these recipes like this, I think it was to maybe normalize some of these stars, because Norma was dripping in diamonds, playing love scenes with Gable, and living in a mansion. So most people, 99% of the women in the world, can't really relate to that, although they'd like to. But they can relate to slaving over a hot stove to make something for their family. So I think maybe these recipes were meant to be like, stars, they're just like us. You know, they might work on a movie, but hey, they're home making lunch as well, or snacks, or whatever.
After they get home at 1 in the morning from that premiere, they're going to stay up and make oatmeal sticks for their kids.
Exactly. Let's see, we have half a teaspoon of salt. Okay,
So,
1.5 cups of scalded milk with the cup of oatmeal. Now, how much oatmeal did you use, Darren, when you redid these?
It asked for a half a cup, and I did a full cup because we need to add density to it. That was our problem.
I will add a full cup as well.
Yeah.
Because I just have half. We're really having to kind of reinvent this recipe to a degree here. Okay, and then we've got 1/4 cup of soft butter. It asked for quite a bit of salt. It said,
I just did a pinch.
okay, I'm gonna do that too. I'm gonna do a pinch because this looks like way too much salt to like a whole tablespoon. Okay, so let's see here. All right, got my oatmeal, got it in the scalding milk. Okay, I'm gonna stir that up for just a moment.
And Jack Fields asked, what is Pancakes Barbara? Which was a meal that Norma's character in The Women asked her cook to make for her husband. And I know it is a real recipe. I don't recall what's in it, but my friend Kenton, I think, has actually made it. And I've actually had friends make it in the past. I've never had it myself, but it was actually a very popular dish in the late 30s. And I think it was pretty much just fruit on a pancake, if I remember right.
You know what's funny is when I was doing my research for this episode, I was going through all these 30s cookbooks I have. And in one of them, Clara Bow, there's a Clara Bow recipe, and she says up front in a quote, hey, I don't cook, but I sure do ask my maid for this, or something to that effect. And so she like openly admits to not cooking, which I thought was kind of awesome because most of them would never admit such a thing, but Clara freely did.
Yeah, I mean, most of these actresses, I mean, a lot of them were very attached to their mothers, and their mothers really fostered their careers and really pushed them along and would just do everything for them. So, you know, for the Ginger Rogers, Carol Lombards, like all of those actresses that had their mother around, they just did everything, you know, from day one. Norma always had her mother Edith with her. She went with her to New York. She came to LA with her. So Edith she paid the bills. You know, she took care of everything just so Norma could just be the star of the family. So it's pretty common.
In my butter to my dry ingredients.
Got it. I'm gonna grab.
Well, it's had time to soften under the hot lights and the heat in here.
Yep.
So, you know what I was thinking, Darren? A friend suggested to me when I was telling her about our recipe here, she suggested maybe mini chocolate chips might be good to add to this. She also mentioned cinnamon and vanilla extract. So I like that idea. I think I'm going to add a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla extract to my my recipe here.
And I think Krista just sent us the recipe for Pancakes Barbara, so we'll definitely have to look at that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I really think, I mean, these Canadian oatmeal sticks, but it's basically just a scone. And I think whatever you want to add to it, you know, cinnamon, chocolate chips, you know, more sugar, any sort of flavoring you want to add, I think it's just going to make them a little more edible.
Yeah, the other night when Darren and I made ours and we realized they were tasteless blobs of stuff, we actually both broke out jars of jam and jelly, and we were dipping our oatmeal sticks or blobs into the jelly, which actually really did improve it.
It did improve it.
So should I just go ahead and pour my milk and oatmeal thing into the dry ingredients now?
Yeah, I've got mine
Okay.
in. I'm mixing it.
All right, that's what I will do now as well. I did mention I have the photo play spoon collection, and I feel I should try to stir this with my Norma Shearer spoon.
I mean, it's kind of a small spoon, but definitely do your best.
It is. Just trying to be on brand around here. It's a photo play recipe.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think those spoons were 1925.
Yeah, and I think they just did a limited line of them, but they're very easy to find today. They're all over eBay, and I've seen them in several places online. They're silver plated, and it's kind of interesting the stars they chose versus the stars they didn't choose for 1925 for those.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it had to do with basically just the politics, and the editor of Photoplay was really close to Norma, and they stayed friends for many, many years. So, and I think it's just politics and a little bit of favoritism too.
Oh, definitely.
So we remade this last night, and I just decided to sort of treat it like a pie crust, where you just want to keep it as dry as possible. So you want to get it mixed together, because then we have to roll it into sticks. And if it's not really dry like a pie crust, it's going to just stick to everything. And that was our problem Thursday night.
To add back a little bit more flour. This is
I just added flour and oats to it, and I'm just going to keep adding stuff to it until it's absolutely dry as possible.
Yeah, we're finding that a lot of these recipes are extremely trial and error here.
Oh yeah.
Put it mildly.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm just adding more sugar and more flour until I get it to the consistency that we need it.
Yeah, because this stuff right now is so wet, there's no way I could actually technically roll it.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely, you just need to think of it like a pie crust if we're going to take it out of here and roll it into sticks. Yeah, I couldn't ever imagine Norma in the kitchen doing this ever. So,
so that's about. They worked 6 days a week. They probably worked 12 to 18-hour days. It's not like they had the time, even if they really wanted to. A lot of them.
No, and they just didn't need to, and they didn't have the interest, and they had people taking care of them. And I had a very dear friend of mine, Mary Carlisle, who was an actress at MGM in the 30s, and Carrie got the pleasure of meeting her a few times. And one day I was talking to her, and she just said out of the clear blue, she goes, "Do they still make smelling salts?" And I said, "You know what? I really don't know. I don't think so." And I said, "Why do you ask?" And she said, "Oh, well, we always just kept them on the sets in the 30s because we would just get so tired or hot. We were just passing out all the time, and it was just part of the job." So you could imagine what sort of conditions that they were working under.
Tell the story about the time at Thanksgiving when Mary asked you, "Where's your staff?"
Oh my God. So Mary, God love her. So I went out to see her, and I said, "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" And she said, "Well, my family's out of town, and I'm probably not going to do anything." So I said, "Well, would you consider going with me to my friend's house out in Glendora?" And that's Christina Rice's mother. And Mary said, "Sure, I'd love to." So I go and I pick her up, and we're driving forever. And she's being very old school Hollywood. She's like, Glendora, why have I never heard of Glendora? What is this place, Glendora? And I kept trying to explain it to her. And I said, "Remember back in the day when you would go to Pasadena and there would be the milk stops that were through the San Gabriel Valley? It's one of those little towns." She's like, "Oh, all right, I get it." So we get to the house, and she's lovely, and Gable, Christina's daughter, got to spend some time with her, which we just absolutely loved. And Louise, Christina's mother, kept leaving the room to go into the kitchen to check on the food and do what she was doing. And so at one point, Mary leans in quietly and says, "Darling, why does the host keep leaving the room? I mean, it's kind of rude. Why does she keep leaving?" And I said, "Well, she's making the dinner. She's going in to check on it." And Mary just as normal as anything was, "But where's the staff?" So it was a great moment. And every Thanksgiving, I'm always looking around for the staff just for Mary.
Many of us wish. Ooh, that's rich.
that we had the staff. And I asked Mary once too. I said, "Did you ever cook?" And she was like, "Oh God, no." She said in the 60s or 70s, she and a bunch of girlfriends decided to take cooking classes as a lark, and they would make these extravagant meals for each other. But they only did that for a couple of years. But she was just another example of that generation. She was very close to her mother, and her mother lived with her till the day her mother died. So very common.
I think I
So
still need to re-add more flour to this, Darren, because I still think it's not getting dry enough to roll.
mine's almost dry enough. It's turning into one big dry dough ball, which is great, but sugar to it as well.
All right, I'm going to re-add a little more flour here. So much flour. While we're mixing the dough, I want to talk about, in the making of this episode, Darren and his husband Eric went down a road that, frankly, I would not have had the courage to go down. I don't think a lot of us would, but they did. And I would like Darren to talk about that. And I would like Eric to briefly appear here and talk about how he's putting his life back together after going down this road. And by this road, I'm of course referring to Norma Shearer's pineapple sweet salad.
Absolutely. So one of the recipes, we had 3 recipes to choose from, and we did find that a lot of the recipes overlapped. So in one book, Norma was making a coffee souffle, and in another book, Anne Dvorak was making the same recipe, ironically. So the one recipe that came up the most for Norma was a jellied pineapple salad. So, and the ingredients in this thing are gelatin, which you dissolve into boiling water, lemon juice, sugar, salt, with a touch of green coloring. And then when that mixture starts to thicken, you add small sweet cucumber pickles, a half a cup of canned pineapple, a half a cup of chopped almonds, and a half a cup of stuffed sliced olives. And so slice the pickle thins, place into a wet mold, and let firm. So I thought, I'm going to try this. Like, I'm going to do this. So I went and got all of the ingredients like a week ago and did it on a Friday night. And I have to show you what the final product looks like.
Fasten your seatbelts, as Betty Davis would say.
It is one of the most repulsive things I've ever seen. So see the green jello with the olive floating in it with the pimento? And it said serve on a bed of lettuce with a dollop of mayonnaise. And then here's what it actually looks like in the mold, if you can see how disgusting that looks. So Eric, come here, you gotta give them your feedback on how it tasted. Yeah. I actually refused to taste it.
Yes, and how Eric is picking up the pieces after this brave move. Eric, tell us all about what happened.
That lovely relish dish that you made with almonds and pineapple and pimento olives and gherkins and aspic. It would have made a really nice mushy relish, but just to spoon it into your mouth raw was pretty awful.
Yeah.
It was awful.
I think Eric deserves a major round of applause, though, seriously, because I wouldn't have had the guts to do that. I wouldn't have. So yeah. I tip my hat to your bravery, sir.
Yeah, that's just fabulous right there.
So, and I did do a little research on this, and these were considered a palate cleanser in the 30s. So they were labeled as a salad, so you'd have it first. And with this mixture of flavors, it was supposed to cleanse your palate and have you prepared for whatever the main course was going to be, which is usually like a tea sandwich or something pretty basic. So because it's about maybe 2 tablespoons per mold, it's really small, so it's just a couple of bites. But it's disgusting. But a lot of these recipes are so.
Yeah, I noticed back going through a lot of these cookbooks, I have a bunch more of these episodes planned, and I'm like, there's gonna have to be so much altering because I do not want to eat veal.
No.
I'm not doing lard. There's a lot of stuff that was very fashionable back then that today it's like you were asking for trouble. So.
Yeah. And in the 30s, it was still very, European American, very bland food. The Italians, the Chinese, they all had sort of their own, towns in each city or their own area. So people just didn't mix. So just traditional American fare at that point is just this really bland, weird. chicken a la kings and stuffed tomatoes and just really bland food. And it really wasn't until post-war when people started to experiment and really get into the Italian dishes and actually adding flavor to their food, because all of these 30s recipes for the most part are really bland.
Oh, yeah.
How's your dough? Because I'm about ready.
I mean too. I had to add a bunch more flour back just to make it malleable. How would you say that?
Yeah.
Ready to get the pan out and start to
Absolutely.
turn our sticks.
So I got mine as absolutely dry as I could, and it was a lot of flour and a lot of sugar to get there. So it's just one big ball in the middle of the bowl. And then it asks you to roll it into sticks. And it says sticks the size of a lead pencil. So the best I can do is, like a lady finger, I guess.
By the way, you might want to put flour on your hands when you do this, because the dough can still kind of get sticky. And
the oils in your hand heat up the dough, and then it starts to stick. So you need to put like a lot of loose flour in the bottom of the bowl at the same time, and just keep the flour going as you're rolling the stuff in. And it really does feel like a pie crust almost.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy.
And by the way, if you make this recipe, feel free to post it on social media. Hashtag Hollywood Kitchen, tag Carrie Bible, Darren Barnes. We would love to see what you come up with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think part of the fun of doing these episodes is to share our passion for film history and Hollywood's past, but also to kind of connect with people, meet people, chat, and make new friends, and share something across the world with each other. And
I mean, we've met people from all over the world just because of this. I've had the most incredible trips. We have friends that are online with us today that we've never met in person, but we have these whole social media friendships with.
Yeah, that's beautiful how movies can connect us and kind of unite us. And Lord knows we need things to unite us and bring us together these days.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky enough, Carrie and I are lucky enough that we live in Los Angeles. So we're still sort of part of this living history. And I'm working on a project right now just to fill the time, and it's been a lot of fun, which is setting up a virtual tour of Norma's homes. So I've been working pretty diligently on it to get all of the addresses, the years, to get my information as accurate as possible. And I've actually learned a lot about her and where she was in life doing this. So
tell me the story you told me about the house you visited in Hollywood that was
Oh yeah, so one of the addresses that popped up for her, I had never seen anywhere, and it wasn't mentioned in Gavin Lambert's book. He chose to just use an address that he wanted to use, which was fine. So I found this address over on Courtney Avenue. So for years, I just sort of lamented, I was like, God, I have all these pictures of her in front of and inside this house. I want to get inside this house to see what it still looks like. So 5 years ago, I was mentioning it to a friend of mine, and he said, you know what you need to do? You need to make laser copies of all of those photos, just put it in a little binder with a note and just put it on their doorstep and just see what happens, so they'll know that you're legit. You just don't want to come in and photograph their house for no reason. So I did it, and the woman called me 5-10 minutes later, and we spoke for 2 hours. And I walked her through her house in my head from all the photos I'd seen. And I said, is that stairwell still there? Is that window still there? Is the fireplace still there? And she's like, yep, it is. So we made arrangements to get together and have some wine and hang out at her house and really spend some time there. But she's been really ill for a very long time. She'd gone into remission and then it came back. So it's been 5 years of me attempting to get into this house. So the other day, as part of this project, I'm like, at least I want to get pictures of the backyard. So I called her and I said, I really hate to bother you, and especially with everything that's going on in the world right now, but would you mind if I came over and just photographed your backyard? And she said, oh, absolutely. Just come on over and do it. So the next day I went over and knocked on her door, and her caregiver came to the door, and I took a bunch of photographs of the backyard and spent a little time. And I just got to thinking like, God, I just wanted a couple of photos of inside the house to really sort of complete this story. So her caregiver came out and said, hey, is there anything else I can do for you? Would you like a bottle of water? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, and I showed him a couple of photos of Norma in the house, one in a stairwell, one by a fireplace. And I said, is that stairwell still there? And he said, yeah. And I said, is that fireplace still there? And he said, well, it's been remodeled, but yeah, it's still there. And I kind of walked through. So I said, would you mind asking the owner if you could just go in with my phone really quick and just take these photos? So he popped right back out and said, well, a couple of places in the house, she said yes. A couple of places, she said no. And I said, I appreciate anything that she'll give me right now. So he took a picture of the stairs, the fireplace, the front window, pretty much everything I needed. And the rest of it was gone because she had remodeled it anyway. So now I have photos of Norma inside the house in the stairwell from 1925 and what the stairwell looks like now, 95 years later. So it's really cool. Like I just geeked out so hard. I sent it to all my old movie friends. I'm like, oh my God, look at this. Look at this. This is incredible. That stairwell still looks exactly the same. So, if I lived in that house every day, I'd come down those stairs and think of like, where was Norma going on this day 95 years ago?
But, yeah. You'll be doing this presentation soon then about Norma's houses?
Yeah. So I'm gonna, I'm working with Christina to figure out, how we want to do it, and we think it would actually be a really fun series to do with our old movie friends, and do these virtual tours. Right now we can't travel, so for the folks that live here in LA that can get out and go do this, it's more. We want to be entertained right now, and we all love this stuff with a passion. So to know that it's still here and to know the history of it, it's pretty incredible. So, all right, how are you doing? So
what my sticks look like.
Yeah, here's my sticks. Mine are much thicker than yours, but
okay.
I figured that'll do. And then we'd stick those in the oven.
It's my oven right now just because it's really hot at my place, but I'll show people at the end of the episode what my version of the sticks look like from Thursday night.
Yeah, and then Eric and I did it last night, and we got a plate of thick sticks. So they're like huge lady fingers, and they're actually pretty darn good. We've both eaten a couple since last night. Yeah, our mess from Thursday night was these that are sort of just blob scone. They look like just a big old mess. And they tasted like absolutely nothing. So, again, feel free to take liberties with the recipe and just keep adding sugar all you want.
Absolutely. So I was thinking, would you mind taking us on a virtual tour of your Norma Shearer memorabilia collection? Because I think a lot of us are really excited to see that.
Sure. Well, I brought everything out. It's kind of scattered all over our loft. So I figured I would just bring out a bunch of my favorite pieces, and I've got them on the dining room table, and I'll just bring them over here to show everybody. So let me grab this. So I did want to grab some of the recipe books so people could get an idea. It was Foods and Fashions of 1935. So this has Norma's recipe in it, but then it also has the current dress styles. There's also diet recipes in here. There's hair and makeup suggestions, but there's also, Walter Houston's baked oysters a la Burr, Maurice Chevalier's brown rhubarb pie. Like I wouldn't imagine Maurice Chevalier going home on a Saturday and baking a brown rhubarb pie. So this also has Anne Dvorak's coffee mousse, which is also attributed to Norma in another book that we've talked about. George Raff's rabbit stew. So
George Raff, one of the fans, before when I announced we were going to do this, one of the fans asked me about Norma and George Raff dating. So do you want to visit that issue briefly?
Oh, absolutely. So when Norma completed The Women, that was not a good experience for her on that film. And it wasn't a Norma film. She had to compete, and she'd never had to compete for attention in her own movie for 15 years or 10 years at that point. So the minute that movie wrapped, she went to a couple of events here in LA and went straight to New York with her intentions of going to Paris with Charles Boyer and his wife. So she got to New York and she spent a couple of weeks there, and she kind of partied. And the Boyers introduced her to George Raft, and they started dating. So she went on to Europe, and I think he might have gone with her. So they went on to Europe together. She went to Paris, and then when war was declared, I think it's September 1st, 1939, she got on the first boat back and was back in New York, came back to LA, and then she and Raph became an item for about a year. But the problem was that he wasn't divorced from his wife. So they became, everybody was very respectful of it, but it was also sort of, he needs to divorce Virginia if you're going to make this legit. And it got to a point to where even MGM announced they were going to make a film together. And, I think after being in a very solid and probably very quiet relationship with Irving Thalberg, her husband, George Raft had this sort of gangster edge to him. And I think he just rocked her world. I think she just, just enjoyed it. And they went to the Gone with the Wind premiere here in LA in 39. They went to the 39 Oscars in January of 1940. So whenever you see the newsreel footage of Norma with Judy Garland, George Raft's behind her. So they spent about a year just having a really good time. And he became really close to the children. He gave Catherine, Norma's daughter, who was born 1935, so she's around 4 or 5 at this point, dollhouse furniture. The kids really liked her. And he always had really good things to say about her, but it just sort of ended. And then he went on to Betty Grable after that, which was probably more his speed. So it was just, I think it was a fun dalliance for her. And I don't know how far it ever could have gone, but MGM did announce at one point that they were going to put them in a film together, but that fell apart pretty quick.
Another thing that people have been asking me too is about the Norma and Joan Crawford feud, because that's definitely something that almost always comes up when Norma's name is mentioned.
Yeah, they were both, big stars at the same studio, and they did compete for the same roles in the early days, in the pre-code days. And Norma was married to the head of production, so she did get preferential treatment. And Joan had come up through the ranks, and she'd been a true flapper. I think she was definitely a racy girl. She would go out and win all these Charleston cups at the Ambassador Hotel. So she was kind of a fast and loose, crazy 20s girl, and just out there. And Norma had always had this reputation of just being this she's with her mother. She's this very, sort of staid, stoic Canadian girl. She's very hands-off, very innocent and pure. So when Joan came to MGM in 25, her first, not really even a part, was doubling for Norma in Lady of the Night, where she had to play the bad girl version and the good version of Norma when they were doing split screen stuff. So I think even at that point, there would be a little resentment no matter where the other actress was, if that's your first thing you're going to do. And then, Joan kept having to fight for roles. And once Norma married Irving, the first couple of years after she married Irving, they just kind of kept her on the same role. And then Irving really started to get interested in her career, like hands-on, about 3 years, so around 1930. And in Norma's autobiography, she even addresses it. And she just said, every time I would look at those big blue eyes, I could just see back there that she was never going to trust me. And I wish she had, or something to that effect. And, they played up the feud for the women, which of course, why not? I mean, and it was no secret. It was on the cover of Look magazine with a picture of them facing each other. It says, these two don't like each other. But I think they respected each other. They just came from two different directions. And, Joan kept going and Norma quit. And I'm sure on both sides, there was probably a little envy even after that. But there's a photo of them in the 50s hugging each other at a party. There's a photo of them at a couple of events here and there. So they were always cordial. They were always nice to each other. And it was always somewhat respectful. And I think they both played up the feud because it's good publicity. It's why somebody asked me the other day about Norma playing Scarlett O'Hara, and that was such a big deal. Well, that book was the biggest book in the country. Everybody was talking about it, and she was represented by Russell Birdwell, who also was working on the search for Scarlett. And I've got a letter where Russell says, "Hey, Norma, do you mind if I float your name out for this? It's basically good for all parties." So they floated it out there, and Norma, quote unquote, accepted the part. And then it came down that her fans didn't want her to play the part. So it just got a lot of publicity for everybody on all sides. And it's just part of the game. You know, it wasn't any sort of deceiving or lying sort of thing. It's just, yeah, I'm going to tie myself to Gone with the Wind right now. It's the hottest thing in town. They're talking about that. They're going to talk about me. Great. You know, let's just keep the buzz going. So yeah, yeah, let me grab a couple other things. I've got a couple other cookbooks. Hollywood Presents, and this is the Uptown Theater in Oakland.
Oh, I don't have that one. That's a great one.
Yeah, isn't it great? And I'll definitely scan it for you. And it has Fred Astaire's lemon meringue pie, Ginger Rogers pimento salad a la Parisian, which is, it's basically this thing that I just did for Norma. James Cagney's cold ham with egg salad. I mean, you know, I don't think he's going to go home and make his own egg salad. And I have one other one, famous recipes by famous people. So Norma's included, but it also has famous chefs at the time. And I think there was a couple of writers. There's Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt. There's radio stars. There's a couple of authors. So it's a lot of different peoples. And again, these were just done for publicity. You know, these recipes, if you really read them, they're just like, you know, throw a chicken in a pan and sort of hope it comes out right. You know, they don't really give you that much direction. So, but I wanted to show you a couple of my favorite early pieces on Norma. So when she came from New York, so she's from Montreal, and she wanted to become an actress. So she was 18 years old, and she and her mother went to New York, and she saved up for it. She was a pretty proficient piano player, and she actually played in silent movie theaters a little bit here and there for extra money for the family. So she went to New York, and she got a bit part in an Olive Thomas movie called The Flapper. So, and the cool thing about this is that Norma's really prominent right there next to Olive Thomas, and her sister is actually back here too. It's the only other time a Tholes ever seen on screen. So the two girls went to New York with their mother. And you watch this movie now, and considering it's Norma's, I think it's like her second or third movie, she made a point of being, as part of this group of girls in a girls' school, she's standing next to Olive Thomas in every scene. Like, she knew what she was doing even at 18. And you can just see her sort of shifting her way, or every scene opens and she's standing right there with Olive.
We should also mention Douglas Shearer is also Norma's other sibling. He was the famous MGM sound man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when sound was coming in, Douglas he'd always sort of tinkered around and was known as sort of being a really smart kid. So he came out in 1925, so he was 26 years old. And Irving, Norma's husband at the time, so around 27, said, I want you to go and learn everything about sound that you can learn. So he went back east, he spent time at the Kodak House, he went all around, and he really educated himself and came back and set up the sound department at MGM. And he was I think he was the originator of the playback, you know, where you just, if you had music, because they were doing orchestras live on the set with chorus girls, and if a horn would go off or a chorus girl would skip, they'd have to start over. And Douglas said, hey, I can actually just pre-record this music, and you guys can just keep doing this over and over, so we don't have to worry about the band and everybody being in sync and the sound quality. And he went on to win at least, I think, like a dozen Academy Awards, something crazy. And he was one of the last employees to actually leave MGM. So he was there from the very early days till the very end of MGM. So, and then one of my other favorite pieces, which, you know, Christina always brags about too. So this is a silent movie short that's long lost called Torchy's Million. So this little muffin-faced actress right here is Norma Shearer. And you would just never know it if you picked this lobby card up. And I actually found it on eBay about 15 years ago, and they didn't list it as being Norma. They just listed it as Torchy's Millions. So I got it for a steal, but I sweated out that week before it actually, the auction ended. So, and then, you know, one of my later photographs of her was, she did this really great soap ad, Woodbury cold cream, which is really common, you know, and they, you know, actresses still do that stuff. So this outtake photo actually popped up, and the dealer who sold it to me had no idea what it was from, and I knew instantly what it was from. And I just think this is around the time she's with George Raft, and she's literally glowing. Like, it's just such a great photo of her, and she has something similar to it in her own personal collection. So I think, she was particularly happy with that shoot too. Something to say? No? Yeah, and let me grab some Hurrells and some other portraits, and I can tell you the stories on those too.
See if we have some questions too. See if any of questions are rolling in here.
Yeah, I wanted to show you an example of one of the Hurrell photos, which is, one of the
So
most incredible photos. So this actually came from Norma's estate. So this is a print that was custom made by George Hurrell, and it's actually autographed in pencil down here in the bottom, and it says Hurrell. And it says George E. Hurrell, photographer. So he's written it in pencil. So, and this is a particularly enjoyable one to Eric because she's got her hands in her face. So he likes to make fun of Norma and me because Norma, a lot of the time, has her hands in her face, and it's just part of her thing. Oh, and then another photo from the same session is her with this little boy.
That's not Irving Jr. though, right?
No. So this gets credited all the time as being Irving Jr. It's just a model. So, and this was actually shot on the same day as the first photograph too. So George made those prints for her, and they were in her personal collection, which Chunk Up came up for auction about 10 years ago. So, and I went to the auction, I was right in the middle of buying our home, and I had a little bit of money, and I was prepared to spend it. And everything went so crazy price-wise that I walked out of there with nothing. Not one thing. And I just thought, as much as I love her and I want part of this, this is insane. Little trinkets that were listed at 100 to 200 are going for like $8,000. Like it was like insulting prices. Like it was crazy. So, but slowly but surely, Bonhams had a second auction, they had a third auction. By the third auction, I think all these people that bought this stuff sort of realized like, oh, hey, there isn't going to be this big rush on Norma Shearer stuff. So by the third auction, I started getting things like this at the opening bid. So, and I just kept an eye on it. And then over the years, people who have known me as the Norma guy have tracked me down and offered to sell it to me for a fraction of what they paid for it. So I'm like, I know what you paid for it, but it's not worth that. And as much as I love her, I'm not going to go that crazy on this stuff. So one of the other things I've been pulling out is this is actually February 28th, 1923. So this is her personal copy of her very first contract with Metro Pictures before it became MGM. So she signed this. So she worked in New York 1921, 22, and into early 1923. And then Mayer signed her to contract, and she and her mother came out here on the train in April of 1923. So, and I've got her November 1923 contract, I have a 1925 contract, and a 1930 contract. So, and I love when you start really reading the notes in these things. One of them, her mother made a note that she would only play feature roles, like wrote it in pencil and made Louis B. Mayer initial it. So it didn't specify that. So she and her mom, were very, very shrewd businesswomen even then, to know to look out for something like that. And they knew that they had a commodity because Norma was becoming very popular.
And long before she met Thalberg too.
Yeah. So yeah, somebody just asked me about Janet Leigh. So Norma had a reputation for discovering people, which is actually kind of funny, and it's never really talked about much. So when Norma and Irving went to Europe in 28, which was a delayed honeymoon for them, they discovered, and it was Eva Braun, and I cannot remember her last name, but they discovered this actress while they were on their honeymoon together, brought her back to MGM. Norma did a photo shoot with her about how she was here with Discovery. They put her in a couple of films and just sent her back to where she came from. In the 30s, there was an actor that she discovered, which I've got a photo of, which I can grab. He did a couple of things. He sort of disappeared. But then in 1946, she was in Squaw Valley and saw a picture of little Jeanette Morrison on the manager's desk and said, "Who's that girl? She's such a pretty girl." and I think it was his niece or daughter, sent the photo to MGM, and MGM brought her in and screen tested her and turned her into Janet Leigh. So she had a very long and successful career. And I was actually able to ask Janet Leigh about that. And she goes in pretty good detail in her book, and she didn't have much to say about that. But she just said that, you know, she and Norma were never chums, and that Norma was almost a god to her. So she would see her at events, and it was sort of like, you know, bowing and paying homage to her. And, you know, to her dying day, she always appreciated that Norma had discovered her. And then the other, you know, big discovery would be Robert Evans, who she spotted at the Beverly Hills Hotel to play Lon Chaney in the James Cagney version, or James Cagney's Man of a Thousand Faces, where he played Lon Chaney. So she brought in Robert Evans to play Irving Thalberg for that.
So Cagney played Lon Chaney, and then Robert Evans was played by
Irving Thalberg, yeah. And I got to when he had his documentary come out, he had a book come out, autobiography, and then a documentary come out. They had a big party at Barney's in Beverly Hills on the rooftop. So I managed to wrangle an invitation for that, because I'm like, God, I need to go talk to this guy. So I got to talk to him a little bit, and they had these great big posters all over the place from his career. And there was this great Kodachrome color photo of him and Norma that I'd never seen together. That was from the day they did a publicity shoot. So I asked him, I said, what are you going to do with these when you're done? He goes, oh, we're probably going to throw them away. I'm like, can I have that? And he went over and rolled it up and gave it to me. So I have this poster, which I wanted to get him to sign it, but it just got too crazy, and then he left. And then a little bit down the road after that, I was invited to his house a couple of times. I got to talk to him a little bit more and actually see his home and meet him. And, you know, he was another one. He really held her in reverence. You know, she was, you know, an incredible woman. She was a god. She was lovely. And, you know, I love finding references about Norma, especially later in life, that other people have written about. And then she pops up in June Allison's autobiography, where she would see her on the ski slopes and she just looked like a goddess. Arlene Francis, who was one of the panelists on What's My Line, and her autobiography actually talks about being at a party in the 50s, and how it's just a bunch of these starlets who are trying to sleep with producers. In the middle of it, there's this beautiful class act, Norma Shearer, who's just, you know, elegant and beautiful with her husband. And nice to know that there's still, you know, good, nice Hollywood out there. And, you know, Kitty Carlisle Hart talks about her in her book. So that's part of what I'm trying to do, is get the voices of all these other people that were around her to show that she wasn't this sort of sad, tragic figure. So it's been fun, and people just keep sending me stuff like, did you know this? Did you know that? And right now I'm actually tracking down a bunch of unpublished autobiographies, and I've got Sidney Franklin, which was a director who directed her quite a bit. And I've got Adrian's autobiography, which is great. You know, he talks about what a hard worker she was, and how she would just drive everybody into the ground. And she could come in and do a fitting for 8 or 10 hours and just stand like a mannequin and never take a break. So she was a very, very disciplined woman. So yeah, want me to grab some more stuff?
Yeah, let's get some more stuff.
I will. So a lot of my favorite stuff are the things that came from her estate. So when I was going through the photos, I bought a big box of random photos. And in one of them was this great picture from, let's see if I can get it without the glare, from Barrett's and Wimpole Street, with her holding Flush, the dog. So, and the inscription says, with love from Ba, B-A, and Flush. And I just like, who is Ba? Like, why would she have an autographed photo to herself, you know, from Ba and Flush? So as I was doing all my research on her and going through all of these books and all these interviews and articles, in 1933, she and Irving Thalberg had gone to Europe on vacation. And when they came back, she gave an interview for, I believe it was Photoplay magazine. And during the interview, her son, Irving Jr., who at that point was 3 years old, came bobbing up the hallway calling her Ba. And the interviewer, I think it was Ruth Waterbury, said, you know, why does he call you Ba? And she's like, oh, well, because he can't say Ma, so we've just turned it into a thing. So she actually had an autographed photo from herself to her son in her collection, which I thought was kind of crazy. So, and I've also got, continuing the George Hurrell stuff. So for Smiling Through, which was this is another one of the custom prints from George that's hand signed in pencil. So these were negatives, and it just says, George Hurrell, 32. So that's the year he shot it. And then some of the great fashion stuff. So this is for Riptide, which is, and the glue is slowly coming off of these, but you can get an idea of like how incredible those are. And MGM would actually name these gowns. So this one was like evening something, but I'm going through and actually making a list every time I would find where they would name a gown, because I think it's kind of ridiculous and just more publicity again.
They didn't miss the trick back then. They really didn't.
Oh no, she had like great photos of Irving and Irving Jr. in her collection, her baby. That I don't think these were ever actually publicized, like this version of it. So, but what were we gonna say, Carrie?
I said they didn't miss a trick back then with the publicity.
No, not at all. So I mean, this is how all newborn mothers look. So with her hair freshly marceled, yeah. Some more of the Hurrells that are just incredible. So, and I love that she kept this stuff in her personal collection. Going through her notes and her letters and things, she was very, very conscious of her career and what the reputation was of her career, and especially of Irving's career. And she worked really hard to try to preserve Irving more than anything else. So, and she kind of made it her life's goal to always memorialize him. And, one of the things that she created was the Irving Thalberg Award. So, which was first awarded, I believe in 1946 or 47. So, and she was such a perfectionist that she had this sculptor who kept making the head over and over and over, and she couldn't quite get the likeness. So this is, I think, the third version of it, and this actually sold at an auction a number of years ago. And I got this with a bunch of the letters to the producer that she gifted it to. And in the letters, in the early 50s, she was living at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and she was robbed. All of her jewelry was stolen, including her wedding ring, which they didn't make public. They never did any press. They never did anything on it. But she had gone over to this producer's house, and this was right after the robbery had happened. And she was such a nervous wreck that she went into the bathroom and smoked a cigarette. So she wrote him a note saying, "I'm so sorry. I was such a wreck that day. And I did something very naughty. I smoked a cigarette in your bathroom, and if you could smell it afterwards, I just wanted to apologize." So I would just think it's sort of a sweet thing. And she did. I've had people ask me if she smoked, and socially, occasionally, she, even though she was from Montreal, she didn't speak French. She played the piano. She was super athletic. So she could do pretty much anything. And Carrie and I were talking about this the other night. One of the quirky things about Norma is that she loved to stand on her head. So she would just do it at parties randomly. And I've got photos of her on the sets of silent movies all the way up to about 1939. And I've got a recount from, and I got to figure out which actress it was, talking about being at a party with Irving and Norma, and that Norma she was wearing lounging pajamas and just got on her head at this party. And the actress said something to Irving about it. Irving's like, "Oh, that's just Norma." So, I think she had a good sense of humor. She definitely had enough humor about herself that, she could still do silly things like that. And I think she knew, with her reputation as being the first lady of MGM and being so prim and proper, that doing something like standing on your head would just sort of loosen people up a little bit. Yeah, so God, I mean, I could go on for days. Trying to think of what else would be fun to show you guys. What was that? Oh yeah. Let me go grab
that photo you just.
Yeah, let me grab that.
By the way, thank you everybody for watching. Again, more memorabilia coming up, but I really appreciate it. And if you make these, tag us, Darren Barnes, Carrie Bible, # Hollywood Kitchen. Again, I'd love to see what everybody comes up with.
So one of the craziest things I came across, I never wanted to be a person who collected any sort of textiles, because it just takes a lot. So, there's a guy in Australia, there's a couple other collectors around the world that really collect, and they really cherish and take care of their costumes that they get. But, over the years I've been offered stuff. So probably 20, 25 years ago, I was actually offered this, and I just bit because the price and everything was just right at the time. And I figured it's small enough that I could deal with it. So I actually have her trapeze outfit from Idiot's Delight. So you can see it's like a one piece. It's got the MGM tag and her name in it. And it actually connects like right here at the shoulder. It has those old 30s little hooks that were probably a pain to put together, but it's in really fantastic shape. Like it's great. And I've seen this, and there was multiples that were made because she was supposed to be part of a trapeze act in Idiot's Delight. So I know this one is hers because it's got her tag in it. But I've seen not Mary Carlisle, Una Merkel, and then Marion Davies wore an outfit really similar to this like 8 years earlier in Polly of the Circus. But then Una Merkel wore one of these for a publicity photo in like 1939. So MGM would recycle their clothes, and that's been one of the questions a lot of people have asked me. What happened to all her costumes? So, and I think her period stuff, of course, stayed at the studio, the Romeo and Juliet stuff and the Marie Antoinette. And a lot of those are still out there, and a lot sold at the Debbie Reynolds auction. But her contemporary clothes, she had it in her contract that she didn't have to supply her own clothes, which a lot of actors and actresses did. So they would design things for her, and Adrian would run these outfits for her. I've got her wearing those clothes all over the world. So I think even if it wasn't part of her contract, she just kept them and nobody was going to tell her otherwise. So for all of those, the early things, all the contemporary early films from, Divorcee, I did find her pajamas in Divorcee. That's like a red stripe across the front worn by another actress in another movie. But otherwise, she's wearing them in London. She's wearing them in Scotland. She's wearing them all over the place. I think she just kept everything. And then the clothes from the women, I think she, there was a jacket that she kept that she wore through the 40s. And there's a jacket from We Were Dancing that she kept. And once we got into the war, those clothes were so new that I think a lot of them were just repurposed because of shortages. So, because it's really hard to find anything contemporary on her. So, and I've got the cap, so hold on. So in the movie, she actually wears a cap. So, and it actually has the cap with the strap that is still like got all of the embroidery on it. So it's pretty cool. And you can see like how big her head was, because she was known, when people would meet her in person, they'd always comment on how large her head was compared to the size of her body, which seems to be really common with movie stars. So yeah, and then I've got one other one. If you want me to grab that, let me go grab it.
By the way, keep sending us your questions because Darren is going to answer many more questions here too.
Yeah, I'm trying to monitor our questions. So if anybody has anything. Do I have any of Norma's makeup? No, but I do have, which I can show you after this, I do have one of her compacts that has a tiny, tiny bit of powder left in it. So, and she was known, which she did right up until she pretty much died, for wearing extremely, extremely pale makeup. So Garbo was known for wearing something that was called Silverstone number 2. So Norma decided she wanted to go to Silverstone number 1, which is like just pale white. So, and she wore that even in public life. And I've found people where they'd comment on like, she's beautiful, but man, the makeup. So it was, definitely a quirk of hers. So this is from a movie. So God, probably about 25 years ago, I got a letter from a lady, and she wasn't very reputable for her costumes. And she said, I've got this Norma Shearer costume. I think it's from the Divorcee. And I thought, okay. And it was $400. I'll never forget. And I told my friend Garland about it. And Garland's like, man, are you crazy? Like, you need to get that. And I'm like, I just don't want costumes. I don't want textiles. And I'd watched the Divorcee, and I'm like, it's not in the Divorcee. So I just bit the bullet and got it. So on the inside tag, it says, it's got Norma Shearer like embroidered in the border. And then it's got an MGM tag, and it's got like 3 different places where it says her name. And it's just this really pretty like champagne silk 20s dress, which I was telling you, Carrie, that you could probably wear one day. And getting back to Norma's makeup. Yeah, and it's got like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it says MGM Shearer where it's stamped. And then it's got like an embroidered place, and then it's got a little pink tag in it. So for 25 years, I've had no idea like where this costume came from or what it was from. So about 5 years ago, Eric and I were in upstate New York, and I went to the Eastman Kodak House to go through their archive of Norma stuff. So, and then Carrie, this is like the overlay for it that goes over it with the big pink bow. So you can see like, and it's pretty sturdy considering its age. So yeah, so you put the dress on and then put this over it with that bow. And I honestly do think you would fit into it, which I think would be awesome for you to do sometime.
Yes.
Yeah, even just for like a photo shoot, I think it'd be fun. Yeah, so Eric and I went to the Eastman Kodak House, and we spent a full day. I got a hold of them in advance, and they brought out cart after cart after cart of Norma photos and ephemera. So I went through and actually helped them recatalog a lot of it that was wrong, and things that they couldn't figure out where they went. And going through it, I found a picture of Norma wearing this dress. And I was like, oh my God, there's the dress. So she wears it in a 1926 movie called The Waning Sex, which is a lost film. And I probably have 50 photos from that movie, but I don't have any from the scene with her wearing that dress. So I had them actually send me a digital print of it. So I do have a digital print, but it's been my goal to try to find an original photo of her wearing it.
And how many of Norma's films are lost films?
So good question. So I made some notes for myself. Let me grab these. She made, I think it was like 59 movies. She didn't make that many movies. Let me grab this. And I think, you and I were discussing the other night, like, what happened to her? Why was she so forgotten? And, why were things so negative around her? Well, she made about 59 films and a number of shorts, and a couple of her silent films are listed in her IMDb page twice, just for whatever under the working titles or anything. So she made 19 talkies, which isn't that many movies, between 1929 and 1942. So over the course of 13 years, she made 14 films. And in 1935, 1937, in 1941, she didn't, and so 3 out of those years, she didn't have anything out at all.
Wasn't part of the reason because Irving had a heart attack at one point, and then...
Yeah, and she, 1935, she took the year off to have a baby, and she had just, in 36, she did Romeo and Juliet, which took a lot of prep. And you and I've discussed, Roman, it's Shakespeare, how appealing is that going to be? And, Shakespeare just doesn't translate to film well, and the age factor, and, it's really hard to have a film that's by William Shakespeare with additional dialogue by Donald Ogden Stewart. Like, how do you get yourself, a credit under Shakespeare? So, that film had a lot of problems, and it wasn't going to play in the Midwest. So, once he passed away, her career was kind of on her own, but she did, just kind of get back to her other movies, the bulk of her career, it's like 38 movies, silent movies between 1920 and 28. She really cranked them out. The first 3 or 4 were bit parts, and then she went right into, featured players. And I think it's 19. No, there's I think 11 left that are actually surviving out of that group, and only about 5 or 6 that are readily available.
Oh, so, I hate that. I hate that there's films I'm never going to see. That drives me nuts.
I know, it's really brutal. So
I'd love to see The Actress, which she did in 1928.
Yeah, that was her second to last. That was her second to last silent, and it's like an 1890s little comedy about a girl being an actress, and the stills from it look adorable, and got great reviews. She always consistently got really good reviews. But from her silent career going backwards, there's A Lady of Chance, which was her last silent, which I always recommend. It shows on TCM. It's available on Warner Home Classics, and it's just a Norma Shearer movie. It's just what the studios would just crank out, and she's so good. Like, she makes the most of this just like paper thin script. And then Student Prince, which a lot of people, love that movie, but I don't think that really represents her very well. And she didn't get along with the director, Ernst Lubitsch, and she kind of had to play it in a way she didn't want to play it. So, and I can almost feel her discomfort after reading so much about that. There's After Midnight, which shows up at festivals quite a bit. And I think you can get bootleg copies of that here and there. There's Waking Up the Town that she did with Jack Pickford. I think there was one, The Trail of the Law, which was 1922, that got released in 1923. Eric and I went to Europe, God, 3-4 years ago, and we went to London and then on to Amsterdam. So we were in London because he wanted to see an exhibit about cruise ships, and we were like getting ready to leave London, and I was sort of Googling and I was reading, and I came across this article about how the British Film Institute had found this movie, Trail of the Law, and had restored it. So as we're at the airport about ready to take off for Amsterdam, I emailed the person at the British BFI, and they said, oh yeah, sure, it's restored. And if you want to come in and watch it, we could show it to you anytime. And as we're taking off to go to Amsterdam, and I've been toying with, because I used to go to New York for work quite a bit, like even going over to like London just for like a day just to see this movie. So, but yeah, there's about 10 or 11, not many of her silents that are around. You know, I highly recommend, you know, Lady of the Night, which is great. And that's the one where Joan plays her double in it. He Who Gets Slapped is great. Upstage, A Clouded Name, which is one of her earlier. A lot of those are available actually on YouTube. You can find those as well, but just a fraction. And the ones that are just like a pure Norma Shearer movie, you know, Waning Sex, Latest from Paris, Excuse Me. I mean, they just go on and on and on, and they're all these cute comedies that are just gone.
Check your attics, people. I hold out eternal hope that lost silent films will turn up someday. Darren, didn't she make another film with Lon Chaney and John Gilbert right after He Who Gets Slapped?
Yeah, so she made a movie called Tower of Lies, which I've been doing a lot of research on, and it's really annoying. And when they came out a couple years ago with the Lon Chaney biography, I think it was on TCM, and I just sat there and I was like, oh my God, this is so excited, you know, and they're talking about London After Midnight, and then they get to Tower of Lies, they don't even mention that he makes it, and they just flip right over it. And I think he's got a bit of a transformation. He plays an old man. I think he plays Norma's dad in the movie, but he's just kind of this old mountain man in it. But even Lon Chaney enthusiasts don't ever seem to give me any sort of feedback or love on that movie. And I'm really curious to, you know, as a Lon Chaney film in particular, you think that Film Archives in particular would really want to try to find that one.
Yeah, it just kind of seems like the elephant in the room film, that this incredible cast, and no one ever talks about it.
Yeah, and then somebody asked me about Norma living at the Motion Picture Country Home. So the Motion Picture Country Home is in Woodland Hills, which is quite a ways out of the city. It's still like an hour drive. So when I was 14, 15, so like 1982, I had decided I was going to go out to the Motion Picture Country Home and I was going to find Norma Shearer. Like I was going to do this. And I made arrangements. I got on the bus and I took the bus over to the valley and I did like 4 changes and I got all the way to the gate of the Motion Picture Country Home and chickened out. I was like, I can't do it, man. And I didn't have anybody there to like egg me on to do it. You know, it's just this little 14-year-old chubby kid. So I turned around and went back. So cut to, you know, many years later, I was volunteering there. And, you know, we're not supposed to talk about, you know, the patrons of the home, and it's about their privacy and stuff. But I was talking to the volunteer coordinator, and she said, why are you volunteering out here? And I said, you know, I really want to give back to the entertainment community because it's always been so good to me. But in particular, you know, Norma Shearer was out here, and I want to see if anybody's still out here that might know her. And the woman said, well, as a matter of fact, my first job here was as Norma's nurse. And I thought, oh my God. And she goes, but I can't talk about it. So, and every once in a while, you know, I'd have lunch with her and she would sort of just throw a story out there, you know, and I think one that, you know, doesn't hurt anybody at this point to say was that Johnny Weissmuller was out there when Norma was out there, and that he would run up and down the halls and do the Tarzan yell, and that she would complain to her nurse. And she was like, for God's sake, will you go tell Johnny to shut up? Which I thought was great. So yeah, and then somebody just asked, do you think Mayer's resentment of the adulation of Thalberg might have affected how she was treated? No, I mean, Mayer and Norma, Louis B. Mayer, had, you know, a very respectful relationship. Norma went to his funeral. You know, they had always stayed in touch, and there was definitely some tension between them whenever Irving, her husband, was fighting with his boss, which would make sense. And then after Irving Thalberg died, MGM wanted to yank away his contract, and it went public for a little while about the money, and Norma was trying to basically say that MGM was taking the food out of her children's mouths. And I think it was Willa Parsons or one of those columnists said, Norma, it's really hard for you to convince people that you are one step away from the poorhouse when you're sitting here in Chinchilla. So you might want to chill it a little bit. So they both calmed down and they came to an agreement. And then, Louis B. Mayer talked her into doing The Women. You would think, if she wasn't a viable piece of property to MGM, he talked her into doing it, and she did it. And it's still the film that she's the most remembered for. Oh, yeah. And somebody just asked, does Eric love Norma too? Eric, what do you think?
She's fabulous.
See, there you go. She's fabulous. That's what he had to say.
Yeah.
We see some of your posters because I love the poster art from that era. The color is so rich and beautiful. And I know a lot of the European designs are just jaw-dropping. So
yeah, the Swedish posters are my favorites. Those are great. Yeah, so let me go.
Gosh, I love Swedish film posters. I'm obsessed. They're so beautiful.
All right, so I have a lot of these, but these are some of my favorites. So these were personality posters. So, and this is actually a French personality poster of Norma. And they're generally around 22 by 28. And any MGM or State or Lowell's Theater would just randomly hang these up of all of their MGM players, whether they had a movie showing or not. So I've got quite a few of these from all over the world that were printed locally. And then, like this is just one I grabbed from the top. Okay, thanks. This is the Australian Escape. So, and a lot of people really I've had a lot of people write because they collect on Conrad Veidt, who is known for Casablanca. So he, this is the only poster in the world he showed up on. So he must have been a pretty viable name in Australia at that point. So, and let me grab some of the foreign ones. Well, here's the American, or this is actually the Australian Romeo and Juliet one sheet. And this is one of the few films that they actually made a variety. They would usually do 2 one sheets, 2 half sheets, 2 inserts, and they would do 2 of everything. But this one, they actually did an individual of her, an individual of him, so they could actually frame this. And then there's 2 versions of the actual one sheet. And then this just kind of goes to show like how popular Norma was. So 1932, she had Smilin' Through come out, which was her most successful film until that point financially. Like it just killed it at the box office. And this movie was so popular in England that it ran for almost 10 years in one theater, which I think is pretty amazing. And I've never been able to verify if that was MGM publicity, but she was, I did verify that she was, even through 36 and 30, the years that she did, or 37, 35 and 37, when she didn't have movies out, she was still the #1 box office star because they would re-release her films. So this is the 1933 re-release of Smilin' Through. So it came out in 32 and she didn't have anything in 33, but she was so popular that it says across the top, letters from people have persuaded MGM once more to present Norma Shearer in Smilin' Through.
That's star power when they want your films re-released like that.
Yeah, like Joan Crawford, Clark Gable, all those other people, none of them had movies re-released during their first like initial runs. Like it's that big of a deal. So it really shows like her star power. So, and I'm trying to think anything else anybody particularly want to see? What do I consider her best role or performance? I mean, of the pre-code stuff, I would definitely say Free Soul. I think Carrie and I probably agree on that for her pre-code performances. She didn't think she was very good at comedy, but I think she's great in Private Lives. And then Escape, just because it kind of shows where her career could have gone. So, you know, and I ultimately, you know, I've got so many ideas of things I want to do, and I've got so much documentation. I want to do maybe even just like an on-demand thing, the story of Marie Antoinette being put together, because I've got boxes and boxes of stuff about Marie Antoinette, but then even Romeo and Juliet, like it's really interesting. And I did a presentation at the Los Angeles Public Library a couple of years ago about Shakespeare on film, and did the Romeo and Juliet portion of it. And, you know, we got to the end of it and they kept me on stage forever with the Q&A. So, because I just think it was fascinating how that film came together and just the politics of it.
I'd love to see that, Darren. I fully encourage you to do these other lectures and presentations.
Oh, absolutely. Let me grab her compact. So hold on.
And by the way, after this is over, I will post links to the books on Fallberg I mentioned, and also I will post links about where you can find Norma Shearer movies on the internet.
Oh, absolutely. So a couple other things is, so here is the compact, which Carrie, I don't think I've ever shown you. So there's the compact.
Oh, it's so pretty.
Isn't it beautiful?
Wow.
Yeah. And you open it and it's got like remnants of a little bit of powder in there in the mirror. So it's got this really beautiful like deco design on it. And this was something that sold in the first auction. And then like 10 years later, somebody wrote me and they're like, hey, you know, I'm desperate. Will you buy this? And I was like, yeah, you know, now it's something I find that's, you know, reasonable. And then one of the other really cool things that have sort of come back around to me was I've got one of Irving Thalberg's wristwatches, which I think is pretty fantastic. So I'm going to have it restored, but you can kind of see. So it's from 1926. And I had to pull up the paperwork on it. So it was May 30th, 1926. It's inscribed on the back, Irving with love from Dutch, 5/30/26. And Dutch was Constance Talmadge, who he was dating at the time. So the fact that Norma still had this in her collection when it sold at auction, and that he held on to it and that it was inscribed from an ex-girlfriend, kind of shows a lot for them. But yeah, it doesn't work any longer, but I'm going to definitely have it worked on. So let's see what else. Richard Anderson, $6 Million Man. So Richard Anderson, who played the $6 Million Man's boss, Oscar Goldman, he was actually married to Norma's daughter, Catherine Thalberg. She was married twice, and she married Richard. And Richard was everything that I think Norma would find appealing in a man. You know, he had sort of dark looks about him. He had been an actor. He had been under contract to MGM. He was very charming, and she loved Richard Anderson. So she was, from what I could tell, she was closer to Catherine, but Irving also lived in the older son lived in other places, but she loved him. And he just came out with his autobiography a little while ago, and I was so excited to read it. And it said, I was married to Catherine Thalberg. Norma Shearer was her mother. And that's all it says. So, and one of the quirky things about Norma is that she didn't want people to write about her. It was really weird. So in the Times, so people would be writing their autobiographies and say, hey, you know, can I say this about you, or can I say that? And 9 times out of 10, she'd say no. So Mervyn Leroy, who directed her, and they were really close friends. He was the director and he was the producer of Wizard of Oz. You know, he did tons of great movies and directed her in Escape. He wrote his autobiography and has a whole chapter about Escape and doesn't even mention that she's in the movie. And that came out, I think, 1970. So I have a feeling he probably just asked her and she probably just said no on that day, just kind of depending on how she was feeling. So yeah, see, do you have any actors in Hollywood stories you'd like to talk about? Trying to think of any sort of obscure actors I'd like to talk about. You know, there's a couple of actors and actresses that worked in conjunction with Norma that I'm absolutely fascinated with. There's an actress named Gwen Lee, who was in the 20s, and she's in Lady of the Night, and I think she made either 7 or 9 movies with Norma. Like when Norma was at her height of being just like cranking out those silent movies, Gwen would play her best friend, or she would play her sister, or she would play her nemesis. And I found a snipe on a Gwen Lee photo once. It said that Norma had discovered Gwen as well, but I've never been able to track that down. And she had been a Wampus baby star. I also find a lot of photos of Gwen wearing Norma's clothes, her costumes. So when Norma is sort of the vampy prostitute in Lady of the Night, Gwen Lee did a photo shoot in that same outfit. And in Upstage, Norma wears this really beautiful peacock dress. Gwen Lee did a photo shoot in the same dress. So they sort of overlap. And then when Norma went into talkies, Gwen Lee just disappears. And by like 31, MGM dropped her. And by 36, she was done. And she just sort of fades off the map. And I come across them being tied together so much for this like 5-year period that, I start to go down that rabbit hole a little bit. I'm like, I need to come back, I need to keep my eye on the prize and keep working on this stuff. And one of the other characters, which sort of overlaps with what Carrie does, is Montabelle, the director,
Yes.
who is buried at Hollywood forever.
Actually, several Norma collaborators are Victor Fleming is there, Montabelle, and Sidney Franklin. All three directed Norma, and they're all three at Hollywood forever.
Yeah, and they all had, great things to say about her. And Montabelle really, he directed a majority of those cute little comedies she did in the silence. And when she was directed by, Victor Seastrom and some of the other directors, I didn't think her charm quite came out. And he was madly in love with her and kept asking her to marry him. But everyone said that she had eyes for Irving. And the last film she did with him was the last film she did before she got married to Irving, which was called After Midnight. And then he just sort of faded off the map. And I always wonder if it had to do anything with him, personally, or if Irving was just kind of like, beat it, the guy was in love with my wife. So, he went over to Fox, he did a couple of pictures, and then he just sort of fades out after a while too. And I've been picking up photos. He finally got married in 1931. I found a wedding photo, and I'm finding little bits and pieces of him, and there isn't much about the end of his life. I'm really curious, like, where he ended up. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. What else, Carrie?
Oh, tell them the story about the Norma killing the photo. That's a good story.
Oh, that's great. So, as I started collecting, I was so young, I would go to these collector shows and I would always cross paths with these dealers and people, in the 80s, this was only, 40 years, 50 years after these things had happened. So these people were in their 70s and 80s and they were still really lively and peppy and could tell these great stories. So I met this guy named Dory Freeman, who'd been the head of the MGM photo department, or at least worked for the photo department. And he starts to tell me a lot of stories about her. And he said that he was the one who would bring photos down to her on the set, and she would approve them. And they would do a photo shoot, and he would have a stack like a foot thick. And he'd put them in front of her, and she would just flip through them. And if she didn't like it, she'd rip the corner off. So I've got about a half a dozen photos with the corners ripped off. That meant that she killed them. So they'd go through it. And there was one photo in particular that he absolutely loved. And so he had them make a print of it, and he kept it. Like, he kept it close to his heart. So he stayed very friendly with her through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he would go over to her house and have her autograph stacks of photos. So there's a lot of photos that are floating around that look like they're almost like a felt tip pin, those are pretty much genuine. Those are from Dory, or from fans that would write her if she was in a mood that day to actually sign them and send them back. So he's like, I was determined I was going to get her to autograph this photo. And he goes, she looked amazing in this photo. I love this photo. I don't know what would catch her eye in these photos. So, because I put it in a stack of like 50 photos, I went over to her house and we're casually sitting there, and she's going through the stack and she's signing photos. And then she stops at that photo and takes a look at it. And then she looks at him and says, Dory, when I kill a photo, it stays killed, and shredded it in front of him. He said he just wanted to cry. Yeah, she's incredible woman. What stories of Adrian? With Adrian, in his autobiography, he said that she would sweep in and just exhaust the crew, and that she just had endless energy and would stand like a mannequin for 8 or 10 hours. And there was a particular seamstress that she wasn't abusive to, but she was just really tough on because she was so exacting. But that she wouldn't eat when she came in. She would bring these little pouches of yeast, and she would eat yeast to keep her stomach feeling full, but it wouldn't bloat her. And he just said it was the only time he'd ever seen that with an actress ever doing that. So that was kind of the only specific story, I've ever heard with them, those two connected. And I know later on, Adrian did her for all of her films except for her last two, which was Colic. Somebody asked her who her favorite designer was, and she said it was Colic, which, they're like, was she just saying it just to stick it to Adrian a little bit, or maybe she was mad at him that day, or yeah. So yeah.
And the fried egg story, we should probably wrap up soon with another cooking story that has to do with that.
Yeah, so when Carrie and I were talking about this Thursday, last Thursday, I've talked to some members of the family, and I've talked to some other people, and one of the things was, did Norma ever cook? And it was always with a laugh, like, no, she never cooked. So Dory Freeman told me this story about how he went over to her house and she was obsessed with game shows. He goes, I always feel like The Price is Right was on every time I went over. It was always in the morning, and it was The Price is Right. And she came out one day and says, do you want me to fry you an egg? Do you want me to fry you an egg? And Dory was like, sure, yeah, fry me an egg. So she went in the kitchen and fried him an egg and brought it out to him. And I guess the maid had taught her or housekeeper had taught her how to fry an egg. And it was literally the first thing she ever learned how to cook. And she was probably well into her 70s at that point.
Awesome.
So yeah. So I mean, the next stuff I've got coming up is the house research, and I think Carrie and I are going to do another cooking program depending on how much people respond and like this one. We've got lots of recipes and lots of things to show off. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Darren, for being our special guest today. Thank you to Eric for bravely tasting the Norma Shearer pineapple sweet salad. Thank you for sharing your incredible knowledge and your archive with us. And I'm just so grateful. This was awesome. And I hope we can do another episode soon.
Absolutely. So whenever you want to do it, and here was our final product again. We're going to go and eat these for lunch.
Excellent. And here's my final product. This is the Thursday night version of my final product.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. They look great.
They do better when they're dipped in jelly.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. And please, everybody, tune in 2 weeks from today for the next episode of Hollywood Kitchen. Stay tuned for details and have a great week.
Bye.